Gina Linetti, the human form of the 100 emoji, might be the most eccentric character in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and that's saying something. Gina understands something modern culture tends to reward. If you act like you're important for long enough, eventually people start treating you that way. That fake it till you make it mentality. Some people absolutely love Gina, and others find her completely unbearable. She's arrogant and self-obsessed. She can come off as weirdly cruel sometimes, and unlike most sitcom characters, she rarely gets humbled by any of it. But I think reducing Gina to narcissist misses something important. This is a character with a lot more layers than you might think. Today we're going to explore the depths of Gina's mind to understand her character, her impact on the world of the show, and on the audience. My mother cried the day I was born because she knew she would never be better than me. Underneath all the ego, absurdity, and sarcasm, Gina is just someone desperately trying to avoid becoming ordinary. She's trying to avoid being replaceable, which, to be fair, many people might instinctively label her as professionally. She is a civilian administrator and the only main character who isn't a detective. Gina doesn't just want attention, she wants exemption. Exemption from blending into the background, immunity from becoming another exhausted adult, slowly disappearing into routine. And because of that, Gina treats her entire existence like performance art, like a dance. Everything about her is exaggerated. The way she talks, the way she enters the room, she constantly refers to herself like she's already famous. Most people build careers. Gina builds lore around herself. She instinctively understands personal branding before the show even has a language for it. She turns herself into content, and what makes Gina fascinating is that she almost never allows herself to appear small. Even when she fails, she transforms it into irony. When people insult her, she turns it into performance, because to Gina, being laughed at is survivable. Being irrelevant is not. Where does this come from? I can't help but wonder about her upbringing. In season 5, Gina very briefly mentions having a sister, and then never mentions her again, which is strange because Gina talks constantly, about herself especially, but when it comes to genuinely personal details, there's this weird emptiness around her family, and I think that absence could be revealing. I wonder if Gina grew up watching what happened to the ordinary child in the family. Perhaps her sister was quieter, more normal, less theatrical, and because of that, less noticed by her parents. While Gina learned that attention goes to the exceptional person, suddenly her whole personality makes a bit more sense. Maybe Gina slowly realized that if she wanted to feel important, she had to become impossible to overlook. But I actually think there's something even deeper underneath that, because throughout the entire show, Gina almost never mentions her father. And that makes me wonder whether the real fear underneath Gina's personality is abandonment. It's speculation, I know, but I think fair speculation. Perhaps her father left her mother for someone more exceptional, a celebrity perhaps. This could have caused Gina to blame herself for not being interesting enough. It could have contributed to a pathological fear of being ordinary. Who knows? The details are guesses, but I think the idea that Gina learned to be extraordinary the hard way during her childhood is probable. She learned to become unique and larger than life, so that nobody could possibly replace her or leave her behind again, which makes Gina's obsession with being exceptional feel much sadder. Maybe she doesn't perform confidence because she naturally feels superior. Maybe she performs it because somewhere deep down she learned that ordinary people get ignored, that ordinary people get left behind. And I think that's why she commits so aggressively to becoming strange. A lot of sitcom characters are accidentally quirky, as byproducts of their personality. Gina is strategically quirky. She would rather people think she's bizarre than boring. And to be honest, I think a lot of people relate to that more than they'd like to admit, because the modern world pressures people towards sameness, work, routine, professionalism, blending in, but Gina refuses to blend in at all costs. She behaves like someone trying to escape ordinary life through sheer force of personality. And the thing is, it works, and we become addicted to watching her triumph in this way. Even the creation of Gina is very Gina. Let me explain. The character was specifically created for comedian Chelsea Peretti by co-creator Andy Samberg, who was actually a childhood friend of hers in real life. Originally, she had auditioned for a different role on the show, Rosa, believe it or not, but she failed to get the part, and instead of simply moving on, the writers ended up creating an entirely new character specifically for her. Because she was so proto-iconic, they just couldn't let her go. This character was built around Chelsea's voice and her comedic rhythm and her style of delivery, which is almost perfect because in the same way reality seems to bend around Gina, it bent around her actress. Even the fact that Peretti eventually left the show in season 6, only to return for memorable guest appearances, fits the character's logic. logic. One of the reasons Gina feels so different from the rest of the cast is because she behaves like she's in an entirely different genre. Everyone else operates according to relatively normal sitcom logic. Jake is immature but emotionally believable. Amy is anxious but grounded. Holt is exaggerated but internally logical. But Gina behaves like reality itself is optional, almost as though she is aware of the fourth wall, almost as if she knows she's in a comedy, in a sitcom, and she has no time for it. She walks through the world with this bizarre certainty that things will somehow work out purely because she expects them to. And weirdly, they often do. There are entire storylines where Gina succeeds through pure confidence, not preparation or competence, and not effort, just confidence. And what makes this interesting is that the show never really disproves her worldview. In fact, it often rewards it. If somebody speaks with certainty, people instinctively assume they know what they're doing, and Gina weaponizes that constantly. She walks into conversations assuming she belongs there. She behaves like somebody already convinced of her own importance, and over time, people around her start responding to her in that way too, which makes her confidence appear justified. There's actually something very modern about this. Social media, for example, doesn't always reward intelligence or wisdom, as we know, and sometimes it doesn't even reward talent. When you look at it, what it often rewards is certainty. The people who thrive online are often the people who present themselves like they already matter, and Gina understands that instinctively years before influencer culture fully exploded. Gina is the birth of the influencer. Now let's go a layer deeper. One of the biggest mistakes people make when analysing Gina is assuming her ego is completely genuine. Because yes, on the surface Gina appears unbelievably narcissistic. She constantly talks about herself like she's exceptional. But honestly, I don't think Gina's ego comes from genuine self-belief. I think it's armour. Because truly confident people don't need to announce how amazing they are every 5 minutes. Gina does, constantly, which suggests the performance itself matters. Is her confidence equivalent to self-esteem? I don't think it is. I think it's more like preemptive self-defense. If Gina walks into every room acting untouchable, superior, and impossible to embarrass, then nobody can easily hurt her. Once you start viewing Gina through that lens, a lot of her behaviour starts making more sense. Even when Gina compliments people, she usually buries it under sarcasm or a joke immediately afterwards. Some people respond to insecurity by becoming quieter, and people normally assume that silence equals insecurity, but a lot of the time it's the noisy people who are secretly insecure. Gina responds in this way, by becoming louder, stranger, more theatrical. It's almost like she believes that if she can become bigger than life itself, ordinary human vulnerability can't reach her anymore. And there's a downside to that, because if your personality becomes a performance for long enough, eventually people stop knowing where the performance ends, and maybe you do too. And this is where Gina becomes divisive, because a lot of viewers don't necessarily dislike her personality. That's not the problem. They dislike what she represents. Gina breaks a rule people unconsciously believe, the idea that confidence should be earned. Holt is the best example of this. His strength and confidence comes from years of struggle and persistence. Even then, he is conservative and careful with his self-image. But Gina walks into the show already convinced she's extraordinary, and she doesn't seem interested in proving it. She doesn't need promotions or medals, which for some viewers is hilarious, a sharp contrast to Holt and to Amy and all the others really. But for some people this is more irritating, because Gina often behaves like she deserves admiration simply for existing. And I think that frustrates people, because Gina represents a fantasy that somebody can become powerful through pure self-belief. Not intelligence or discipline, not hard work, just self-belief. And sometimes in real life that actually happens. Confident people often receive opportunities simply because they appear confident. People listen to certainty, even when they maybe shouldn't. And Gina understands that. But I also think there's another reason people find her uncomfortable. Gina has freedom from shame. Most people spend huge portions of their lives self-monitoring. Am I being annoying? Am I embarrassing myself? Do people secretly think I'm weird? Gina behaves like those questions don't even exist. Now personally, I don't think she's actually fearless. I think she's performing fearlessness, and there's a difference. But either way, I think to an extent we all admire her for her refusal to be homogenized. We admire people who refuse to be anything but themselves. What makes her especially interesting is that underneath all the absurdity, she might actually be one of the most emotionally intelligent people in the precinct. She notices insecurities, weaknesses, social dynamics, and Captain Holt, who struggles with many of these things, employs her abilities. Gina understands identity. She understands what people desperately want others to think about them, and that gives her enormous social power. That's why she manipulates people so effectively. She immediately understands Amy's need for validation. Holt's emotional repression, Jake's fear of stillness, Charles's insecurity. And because she understands those things, she knows exactly how to affect people emotionally, but she often uses this ability to help people. Even though she pretends not to care, a lot of Gina's best moments involve pushing characters toward growth. One of Gina's most important relationships in the show is the one she shares with Jake, because Jake is one of the only people who fully accepts Gina's weirdness without trying to reduce it and without judging it, and Gina does the same thing for him. Their friendship feels rooted in childhood in the best possible way, not just because they grew up together, but because they preserve something childish in each other. Neither of them fully wants to become a serious adult. Jake hides behind humour, Gina hides behind performance, but both characters are terrified of emotional exposure, and that's why they understand each other so naturally. Jake validates Gina's mythology, he treats her absurdity like it's completely normal, and Gina gives Jake something equally important: permission to stay weird. A lot of adult friendships become based around responsibility and practicality. Jake and Gina's friendship is based around freedom from pretending to be normal. Gina's relationship with Amy is one of the most psychologically interesting dynamics in the show, because Amy represents everything Gina is simultaneously threatened by and fascinated by. Amy is disciplined, organised, responsible, and structured. She believes success comes from consistency and effort and achievement, and Gina constantly mocks that worldview. But I think part of the reason Gina targets Amy so aggressively is because Amy represents the exact kind of adulthood Gina is trying to avoid. Amy succeeds by fitting into systems. Gina succeeds by refusing systems entirely. Amy earns validation, and Gina tries to rise above it. These two survival strategies are opposites, but despite acting completely different, both characters actually care deeply about external approval. Amy responds by trying to become perfect, and Gina responds by acting like perfection itself is beneath her. And I honestly think Gina sees something emotionally dangerous in Amy's worldview, because Amy's life suggests that maybe success doesn't come from being extraordinary. Maybe it comes from discipline and patience and routine, which completely clashes with the mythology Gina has built around herself. But underneath all the teasing, Gina clearly respects Amy. Holt is controlled, disciplined, professional. Gina is chaotic, absurd, disrespectful. But underneath all of that, they're actually very similar. There's even an episode that reveals they are the same personality type, I9C3G6. Both characters are leaders, and they carefully construct their identities, but both personas are extremely deliberate. Neither character likes appearing emotionally exposed, and neither likes looking weak. And more importantly, neither character will allow others to define them. Gina's relationship with Charles is a strange one, but it's one that I had to mention. She treats him like he's radioactive half of the time, and yet they sleep together, multiple times if you remember, and when the relationship is first revealed, Gina desperately wants to keep it a secret, which initially makes her look cruel, because Boyle is openly affectionate while Gina behaves like admitting attraction to him would destroy her reputation. But I actually think the relationship reveals something very important about Gina psychologically, because Charles represents the exact opposite of performance. Charles is emotionally transparent to an almost ridiculous degree. He doesn't hide how he feels, he doesn't protect himself with irony, he doesn't act cool, and he doesn't strategically manage his image. Charles is sincere all the time, painfully sincere sometimes. So I think part of the reason she mocks Charles constantly is because he represents a type of emotional openness that genuinely terrifies her. Even when Gina cares about people, she usually disguises it with sarcasm, insults, or absurdity. Charles skips all of that completely. Not only that, but he has much lower self-esteem. While Gina places herself at the top of her social hierarchy, Charles normally places other people above him, especially Jake. And weirdly, I think Gina respects him for his differences, because despite all the jokes, she repeatedly protects him throughout the series. She stands up for him with Pimento, she defends him to Holt, and underneath all the insults, she clearly values him emotionally, which makes their dynamic feel less like genuine tension and more like somebody emotionally defensive interacting with somebody emotionally fearless. I'll let you decide which is which. I think the reason Gina remains such a divisive character is because she represents traits people simultaneously admire and resent: confidence, freedom, individuality, and shamelessness. A lot of people wish they could move through life with even a fraction of Gina's social freedom, without constantly self-monitoring and overthinking, without worrying how they're being perceived every second. But at the same time, people also resent characters who seem protected from consequences. Do you see somebody arrogant, or somebody desperately trying not to disappear? Because underneath all the narcissism, irony, and absurdity, I honestly think Gina is terrified of becoming ordinary, and to be honest, that makes Gina more relatable than people realise. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, a thumbs up helps out a lot. I'd love to hear your perspective on Gina in the comments below. I have an exciting video on the way, which I'm just about to get on with now. If you're interested, you can follow me on Instagram for updates. A special thanks to my supporters on Patreon: Carlos Diaz, Keegan Smith, Beverly, Laura Starr, Casey, Daniel, and Greg Whitworth. That's all I've got for you today, but I'll be back shortly. Until then, have a great week. Bye!